Hello and welcome to the Trent Valley Railway. In this video we'll be taking a look at planning the track layout. This video is part of a series of videos for the Trent Valley Railway which documents how the layout has been constructed and built and what goes into planning each stage of the build. In this video in particular we'll be looking at some of the ideas which I first set out at the very beginning for the layout, what I've looked at for some of the sort of scenery sections on the higher levels of the layout, and then how this links in with the lower levels of the layout, and particularly then the fiddle yard sections and how this connects with the inclines. As this video documents the work done over the past few years, this will mainly be full of photos and drawings and plans for what I had envisaged, and then eventually showing you what has happened in terms of actually the track work for the layout on this lower levels of the layout. Hope you're enjoying this video, and we'll now take a look at the early stages of the planning for the track work on the layout. First of all, at the very beginning, the ideas for planning the track layout began using the Railplan system and software on the computer. And this looked at what I would want as an end state for the scenery levels of the layout, which would have included a very large station and then some sort of traction maintenance depot TMD for some of the locos I have on the other side of the layout. I constructed the baseboards previously and the framework at a very early stage for the scenery level above where the fiddle yard would go. And I've used this area then with the baseboards just lying on top of that framework to start planning out what some of those ideas would be and what the track work would start to look like on that scenery level of the layout. On the picture on the screen, you'll see that there's a Pendolino, and that's one of the first things that I used in terms of how long a 9-car Pendolino is, and looking at that in terms of could I fit that in a sort of station scene which would be on the full length of that scenery section. I used a 9-car Pendolino length then to measure the platform distances that I sort of have, check that against the Railplan software, and then started to look at where I would want to probably put some of those point works and the curves for coming round the corners off the end of the station area and then into the inclines. This would then be a sort of full scenery section on that level. And beyond that, I then started to look at how much width I have on this baseboard, started to measure the distance to the back, and started to think, well, have I actually got room above this section here to put in more track work, more scenery, or do I need to rethink what is going to go on this scenery section of the layout? I still haven't decided as yet what I'm going to put onto that scenery section, but I'll start to look again at the track work in this area. But at least I know here that a Pendolino in a station full length gives me about 300 centimetres of route there, and you'll see the full length down to the other end of the garage gives me enough room to sort of plan up a sort of track work which would look quite nice and realistic for the Trent Valley Railway. I then started to look at how the inclines would join in with the lower level of the layout. On both inclines I'm planning to have a 2-track railway, so that there is an up and a down, which there would then give me a full loop around the layout and up through the scenery section and back down again. So I started off by looking at the smaller sort of section that I had at the very back, down by the sort of garage door end, where you'll then see that I sort of put in the Voyager to see if I could have enough room between where the incline finishes and coming around onto the removable section to fit in 2 sidings in that space, as well as then keeping some running lines around the corner, and they would all join back up before they got to the removable baseboard section. So I planned out the track work in the area for those 2 sidings, and as it comes around the corner it joins up with the removable baseboard section, and if you've been looking at the pictures in detail you'll notice that there is an extra line that would also go off towards some other sidings underneath one of the inclines, which I'll talk about in a little while in this video. As it comes onto the removable baseboard section, this is then an area where I thought that I could get a lot of the sort of point work in, so that you could switch tracks and sort of get out and fan out towards the fiddle yard on the other side of the layout. As the pictures of the planning the track here progress around towards the main fiddle yard, you'll see that there's a number of then points that also got put out, and then to see how many fiddle yard lines I could have on this main section here. There's a lot of work here to make sure that also that the radii of the curves are not too tight, and also there's further sidings that were also looked at the very back of the layout on this section as it comes off the removable baseboard section. As I've then progressed down the main fiddle yard, there's around about sort of 12 main siding lines that I've been able to fit in the sort of planning stage here, between the running lines on the far left and the running lines on the far right, which the running lines there are shown as the concrete sleepers. And this is where I'd then be able to have a through route all the way past the fiddle yard without having to worry about running through sidings which might be occupied by rolling stock. I've then progressed planning the track here down towards the other end of the fiddle yard, looked at the turnouts and the point work then that was also needed to bring those sidings back into the main running lines, and overall here the space did sort of give me enough room to again have a sort of several, so sort of 5 to 6 300cm sidings which would house Pendolino or a long container train for the layout. Some of my other rolling stock could then fit in some of the other fiddle yard lines on the outer and sort of inner sections on that side of the layout. As the fiddle yard area finishes towards the back of the garage, I then started to plan out the next section around the corner at the very back, which is sort of the mirror image of the removable section, with a few more points in this area to then access into some other sidings, whilst the main running lines would carry on around the corner there and join up with the incline. These pictures are at a little later stage compared to some of the other planning pictures that you've seen in the early part of this video, because I wasn't too worried about the space constraints that I might have had in that section of the layout. So as those tracks come around the corner, there's then room on the other side of the layout to have another smaller fiddle yard. Plan here is to have around about 5 to 6 sidings, around about 2 at 300cm for a few of the longer trains there, and a few at a bit of a shorter length for some of the sort of Network Rail HST trains that I have, and some of the other Network Rail coaches. This area I'm sort of planning to stable most of my Network Rail rolling stock, and in turn I could sort of turn this into a sort of scenery section in the future if I wanted to, but the sort of plan for the sort of point work and the tracks seem to work well, and then it sort of carries on as a sort of grade separation underneath the incline, and then joins it with what I discussed earlier on the removable baseboard section. This would then give actually a loop around the lower level of the layout if one of the trains was to pass through the Network Rail sort of fiddle yard section there, and then go round past the through lines on the main fiddle yard, rather than going up the inclines on the layout. Planning the track layout or track work is really useful to make sure that you know that you've got the right space to do what you need to do, and to plan your way around the track laying process. What I had actually put out for a sort of track plan on the layout in some areas has been a bit difficult to sort of put in place. So there's a few things here which I'll sort of talk through of the changes that have actually happened between what I planned in the track work and what has actually been put down on the layout for the main fiddle yard and these smaller sidings here towards the garage door end. One of the first things I found out whilst planning the track work is it's okay to lay the points wherever you may wish to sort of want them in sort of good purpose and using up as much space as you want. but it came apparent as I've gone round the layout in certain areas that the points clashed if I wanted to put a point motor in with some of the woodwork and framework underneath the layout. So particularly for the smaller sidings by the garage door, and also by the breeze blocks on the main fiddle yard, I had to actually make some modifications to what I wanted to sort of plan out to get the maximum number of fiddle yard sidings, and I've had to make some compromises in those areas to make sure that when I drilled the hole through the baseboard, I was able to fit a point motor and not sort of conflict or clash with the framework that I'd put in underneath the layout. Along with planning the track work around some of the constraints on the framework and underneath the baseboards on the layout, one of the other challenges around doing this was it's fine to basically plot out what you need when you first set out, but then to think about actually how practical is it to have the spacing between the fiddle yard lines so close, basically not being able to get your fingers between the two lines which rolling stock would then be on if you got a derailment. And there's other sort of considerations as well around sort of did I need to prop up the inclines around the layout and leave a bit of space between the running lines compared to what I had planned. With thinking about the sort of practical use in mind there, then you'll note now that the sort of change between the plan and what's actually happened is particularly in the fiddle yard area. I had planned for around about 12 sidings, and particularly about 7 of those of sort of good length for long rolling stock sort of rakes. That has had to change because of obviously the clashes with the point work and the framework. That has meant that I've actually ended up with 9 sidings on the main fiddle yard, but instead I've then used sort of the space on either side of that main fiddle yard at the very back, where I've added in an extra siding towards the garage end, so I've got 3 behind that running line. And then I've also added in some sort of dead end sidings at the very front of the fiddle yard to fit in some of the other rolling stock that has now sort of not been able to be fitted into the sort of middle sections. And again, the same as well has happened towards the back, where I've put in another 3 sidings of good length, but they're basically not through sidings, so I'll have to put like trains which are DMUs, or for example the Arriva Trains Wales with the 67 in those sidings. In conclusion for the video here, which was about planning the track work or track layout for your model railway, it's been sort of proven here that it's very important to plan it out first, because a plan may never actually be what goes down on your layout. You might have very sort of various plans or many different plans before you actually settle on the sort of final sort of layout for the track. A lot of sort of good work by myself then went into sort of thinking around about the practicality of obviously the track work that I was also putting down, but still trying to use the maximum space around the layout. This last bit here will just show a quick picture of what I did have planned in terms of the track layout, and then this now shows the actual track layout on the lower level of the layout. There's still more work obviously to be done about the inclines and then the track layout for the scenery sections, but I'll speak about that in future videos. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on the Trent Valley Railway.